This episode is brought to you by Encore Business Group, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Williams Chiropractic, Elite Winning Solutions, and Sal's Complete Home Painting and Handyman Services. Shayne grabs extra points with Ron Walsh airs live Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm.
We're going to try to figure out what to do with that. Dan is keeping us on track here on the board, and Shayne's in studio here with me, and so he's going to help decide. I think he was kind of leaning towards the absurdity day. That's a little bit more amorphous, but it gives us more room. And then I was telling you, Shayne, that I just like us posing the question to these writers and saying, what would you name your computer? And they just go like Phil. You know, like it just is just a random name. But I'm curious what you had for National Absurdity Day, because I'm sure there's some absurd things that happen, you know, in a locker room or for a former 15-year veteran like yourself. So I'm curious what you have there.
Well, there's a lot of things in conversation in the locker room that do not go out on the air. And you know, what happens in the locker room is, you know, kind of the Cosa Nostra, you know, family only type thing is how we kind of look at that. So I wouldn't give away any of that stuff, but I will say I've got a group of friends. These are guys I went to high school with, and we would get together every now and then post college when I would be back in my hometown after I'd gotten into my pro career, and we'd go out to sports bars and we'd hang out and you know, watch games or whatever. And there was this one time, I forget what was happening. I forget what sport it was. I forget what the occurrence that there was a bet made. And it was like, if this happens, then you know, whatever. And I never wanted to make money be like the issue of a bet, because people can get emotional over money. So it was always, you have to do something stupid.
Right.
Okay, the bet was whoever lost the bet had to go into the public bathroom of this restaurant, the sports bar.
It's bad already. Yep.
And you had to pretend like you were in kindergarten and drop your pants to your ankles at the urinal.
Is that called I think that's a Winnie the Pooh, maybe?
Maybe.
No pants?
Maybe.
Yeah.
So, and then you had to tell the person beside them they had a nice watch. So I'll just let you take that how you want to take it. It's an extremely awkward situation. I may or may not have lost that bet, but the bet was paid up. So that's all I'll say.
Okay. That seems like a bit they would do on like Impractical Jokers. I don't know if you've seen that show, but that seems like something they do because they're good with those. Yeah. Like if you just said, hey, I had to ask somebody if they, you know, about their watch, like that'd be like, oh, okay, that's nothing. But in that scenario, it's a lot different. It changes the stakes there, raises the stakes. That's a good one for absurdity. I don't know. I'd say I'm looking at our list here. I think all these guys, I think we'd be safe saying, hey, do you have like an absurd bet story? I don't think they'd get too crazy. Some of the regular guests that we have, I'd be a little bit worried about, but these guys might be okay. So we might have to ask them that because the PC one will just be awkward. This one will probably get us better stories. But but the big one. So who we're going to talk about, obviously, all the football stuff, the Lions game from last week. We were just watching the controversial pass interference here in studio before we started. So we'll ask Glenn Erby about that. We'll probably ask Ty Schalter about that. Then we'll preview the Packers-Lions game on Thanksgiving. But the big news is that we're going to be, I don't know if you know this, Shayne, but since I started my show last year, I have not missed a show. So I want to keep that streak up. You seem like kind of the Iron Man type. All the NFL players are Iron Man type. It doesn't matter. They're there. They're fighting through injuries. You always got stuff going on. So we're going to do a show on Thanksgiving. It'll be our regular slot, 7 to 9. We'll be able to review the game the day of, which I think will be fun. But since the theme of the day will be obvious, since it's Thanksgiving, it's going to be related to Thanksgiving food. I'm thinking we should do a Thanksgiving food draft where we do, I need to get your kind of parameters, what you're thinking. We need to brainstorm here. One main course,
Main course.
And like a two or three sides. It depends on how deep you want to go with the sides, because we're probably going to have like 5 guys participating. So you got 10, 15, that you got the multiplication factor of how crazy you want to go with the sides. And then probably a dessert. I don't know if you want to add a drink. I was also thinking of incorporating a football element. So, we could have our food and then we could have a football element, like, hey, who's your ideal commentating team that you would want to listen to on a Thanksgiving? Something like that. That's just an idea. We don't have to go with that, but that's to kind of kick off the brainstorming, because I like the commentating part a lot. And so I feel like people would have a team that they may want to hear. Maybe they want to hear Buck and Aikman, or maybe they want to hear Tirico and Collinsworth. Mine would probably be a little bit more off the board.
I might even go with people that have passed away.
Yeah, the classic Madden Summerall. You got that's who you think of. I feel like that's kind of the iconic pick, and it could be historical. I feel like that should be open to being chosen, and because then I like that you'd have a lot of strategy there, because then it's like, when do you pick what? Do you go for your main course? Do you go for the commentating team? Do you try to roll out the sides since you got 2 or 3? It's kind of like a fantasy draft, because you got to strategize based on how many slots you have, and so I'm curious what you think of that, and what you'd potentially add, because Dan would participate in this too, and he's in studio with us right now. But so this is kind of more of a brainstorming session here before we kick off with Ty Schalter at 7:15.
I think the food part, I love that idea. I think you've got to maybe at least go 2 rounds. So I don't know if you pick 2 main courses, or if you find like a hierarchy of, this is, what the picks are for some people, because there's always this argument over, is it turkey, is it ham, is it, whatever. John Madden would say turducken, or whatever. But I think you got to at least give it 2 rounds.
For the main course.
For the main course.
Okay. I like it. You're making it even more complex.
Or at least 2 rounds to fill out the table.
Okay.
What's going to be on the buffet.
Okay.
Because I think if you go, 5 people picking 2 rounds, you run out of options for main courses. But 5 people going through, and maybe that's 2 rounds of main courses, you might get, not every course. I'm sorry. Each one gets 2 picks. That's going to be what, 10 picks?
Yeah.
So I think if you go that deep, you can kind of see like a little more range outside of mac and cheese, outside of green bean casserole.
That's why I was thinking 2 sides, because then you're 10 sides deep. And then by that 10th side, I don't know what that's going to be, but there are 10 sides. But yeah, we might have to get like some parameters, because can you take like a mashed potato and a baked potato? Are those separate? Sweet potato casserole,
scallop potato.
Yeah, exactly. So it's how particular we're going to get, but we'll be the judge and jury of that.
Yes.
I feel like in studio we'll be able to approve.
That's
like
our privy.
Exactly. Like, hey, no, we'll accept that, or no, you got to pick something else that's already been chosen and is off the board. So I like that we're working on this, because desserts might be a sneaky tough one, just doing one dessert, because there's some obvious desserts that I feel like people are going to pick, your pumpkin pie, your apple pie. Those will probably be quick off the board. And then it's like, well, what other desserts are you throwing out there? There's a lot of desserts, but what's your Thanksgiving dessert?
Yeah.
So I feel like that could kind of stump some people. And I like the idea that we have different categories, because then you have to strategize when to draft the category. Maybe people want to take a dessert first because they want to get that pumpkin pie.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody wants that main course. They got to get the turkey. And so they got to draft that early. Turkey's going to be off the board early. So we'll brainstorm about this over the course of the next week, but that's kind of what I wanted to introduce. And then we will have one of the people that will be participating, Jacob Westendorf, at 8:15, so he can help us with the brainstorming. He's always good for that in his segment. So yeah, right now the schedule is Ty Schalter at 7:15, Glenn Erby talking about the Eagles side of things at 7:45, and then Jacob at 8:15, and then Shayne and I will close out the show and get his point after there at 8:45. But yeah, one of the things I wanted to talk about in this first segment is, with the first thing, now I watch games differently because we're doing the show together, and I'll see something and I'll go, I got to ask Shayne about this. And the first thing I thought thought that about for the game on Sunday was the fact that you got a cold game, you got a windy game, and they showed how swirling those winds were when both Bates and the Philadelphia kicker were out there warming up. And I'm curious how you handled that, because there's so many moving pieces to that. You talked about ball preparation in one of our previous interviews. That's got to factor in. The temperature itself has to factor in. Field conditions have to factor in, whether you're, what you're playing on, what in the condition of that. Then you have the idea that the wind could be 1 point if it's an 8:15 game like Sunday, could be 1 point at 7:30, but then they could be completely different at 9 o'clock and when you're actually kicking in the game, or different at the beginning and the end. So I'm just curious how you kind of take that in and go through that as a kicker, because there's so many variables there.
So the first thing I'll say is we all have this, if you know people in the military that shoot long range, they have a system called DOPE. So you create data upon previous entry, I believe is what that means. So you're gaining experience every time you kick in any field condition. So you start to learn your parameters at this mile per hour, and you start to learn kind of how to gauge the mile per hour. Looking at the flags, there's certain measurements and math you can do for that, and you just get a feel for it. But you start to realize, how much do I need to compensate for a crosswind? If I'm kicking into a wind, what are my range limits? And you get that information throughout your career, and you're just stacking it up. But when you show up for a game, or actually when you have that week before the game, you kind of know what the weather's going to be. The difference is if you're the away team, you may not have the option to replicate that during practice. One thing Belichick was always big on was, we had snow on the ground. He would put a huge tarp over the field, and he had these huge heaters that would blow heat under it, and it would actually inflate over top of the field to keep it warm and keep snow off of it. And then right before practice, he'd pull it off. And we practiced outdoors while it was snowing, while the weather was bad, so we could actually get work done. But he would not go in the bubble, because he's like, we're going to play in it, we're going to practice in it. So you kind of get some scopes of what bad conditions can feel like that way. If you're the home team, obviously you get a chance to go out, kick in your stadium, kind of see what it's going to do. But that pregame warm-up is very important. You get about 14 kicks to figure out what the wind's going to do. And you learn at what distance does the ball move laterally, this much or this much. And you start learning, okay, at this distance I need to aim this much more to the right, or this much more. When I back up, I've got to aim even more. Do I ever aim outside the uprights? Only once in my career did I ever have to aim outside the uprights.
That was going to be my question, because it has to be so tough, because you're doing thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even, of kicks over your lifetime, between practice, games, starting out, all of that. It has to be so tough to say, hey, I've been my whole life, I've been trying to get the ball in between these two yellow posts, but for this one kick, I got to aim to the left about 5 feet outside of the posts. But there were a couple kicks, both in practice, and then there was one in the game that for Bates that were like that, where it's like, yeah, you almost had the amount of break that they had from certain distances, that almost seemed to me like an outside the posts kick. So I'm curious how yours went, and if that looked like that kind of weather. Obviously you didn't kick in it or anything, but that looked like that kind of weather for those practice kicks on Sunday.
So I immediately think back to a 32, I believe it was a 32-yard field goal I had on the right hash when I was playing for New England. We were playing in Chicago. It was a Sunday night game, December, I want to say maybe December 10th. I'm not exactly sure. But we played in a blizzard. I mean, they were bringing out the scrapers to scrape the lines off so we could see where to put the ball down on the field. Sustained winds pretty close to 30, 40 miles an hour, gusting up to 70. In pregame warm-up, the snapper had to chase the ball a few times because it was blowing the ball off the field as we just sat it down to prep for the plays. In that game, I had a 32-yard field goal on the right hash. It was the only field goal that I really remember aiming outside the upright. the wind. I mean, the goalpost. You can see it in the TV copy. It's on YouTube. The ball starts outside the right upright, and it barely lands just inside the left corner of the goalpost. And the kick was good. I went 3 for 3 that day. And the one thing I always felt is under extreme conditions like that, I had nothing to worry about because the expectations are so low. Everyone's like, holy cow, how can they do this? So I never had that like inert feeling of I'm afraid of screwing up because they don't expect me to do well, so I'm just going to feel free and let loose.
It's almost the opposite of the regular scenario because you have too much pressure on you in the regular scenario. Like, hey, you don't have any field conditions.
Exactly.
Hey, it's easy. Some schlub sitting on their couch like me, that's easy. But then it's reversed because then you're feeling a little bit more pressure maybe for that. With this one, you don't have the pressure, but you do have the circumstances where people know that that's not easy, even though it's not easy at any point in time, even with clear conditions, because you have so many other factors.
Yeah, and honestly, that's what makes those type of games fun, is when you do the ordinary in that situation, it's the perception is that you did something extraordinary, and it makes you look good. So you feel good because you're like, nothing to lose. I'm not afraid of this. I don't care. So it's a good situation to be in, but also when you're able to do that, you're just building experience for the future for when you may have something worse or when you may have something slightly less. You're just building that data for you to use later.
I didn't think of it as a database because I thought of it as so many unique, almost like a snowflake, unique situations. But it does make sense that, you're the type of wind, the angle of the wind, all of those things that then compiles, hey, I had this similar type of wind at a game 2 years ago. There was a similar distance at a game 3 years ago, whatever. And so you compile all that. So that's interesting. Yeah, that's the first thing I thought of with that game.
I actually have notebooks from my whole career of every practice. Every page is a practice or a game. And every time I kicked in a stadium that I hadn't kicked in, I had a full synopsis of what the wind patterns were in that stadium. I would look at weather reports. I would see with the winds coming out of the here, out of the there, whatever. And I would look at game film, and I would see on that day what was the weather doing. And I would actually use that information so that I could know before I got there kind of what to expect. And all of that experience. I mean, that's what some people say, I never lose, I only learn. All of that experience is just building up so you can use it again towards something positive in the future, and really just being able to observe it, see it from other people's experiences. I mean, it's kind of a parallel to life if you think about it, but it's that's what makes, if I'm being honest, that's what makes guys who play a few years and guys who play 10, 15, 20 years. That's the difference.
I can see that because, you have the knowledge advantage at that point. Everybody's got similar, you might have a little bit of an athletic advantage at the beginning. You're younger, you're more flexible, whatever. Not always more flexible, but younger. And so that's interesting. Yeah, well, I'm glad we had that discussion. We'll have to talk more about that. But we're going to throw it to break quick, and we'll bring Ty Schalter into the conversation of Pride of Detroit after the break. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guy here into the conversation with Shayne and I. We're having an interesting conversation about kicking. He might even have questions for Shayne here, but Ty Schalter of Pride of Detroit, one of our favorites to have on the show. He had a great article that I read today about the upcoming matchup and kind of where the lines are located here, because obviously people are a little disappointed with the loss on Sunday, but I don't think the expectations were super high. There were some takeaways there, but your article kind of highlighted that they're pretty much where they should be right now, and then it'll depend on the stretch run where they still have a difficult schedule. But we always celebrate a thing of the day. We're between Name Your PC Day. That's pretty. I mean, you can just throw out a name if you want, or it's National Absurdity Day. Shayne told a great story in the first segment about a bet that he lost, and that what the aftermath was of that. So I'm curious if you have a similar story that obviously is PG-13 or less.
Yeah. Okay. A name will be redacted to protect the innocent here, but I can do a gambling story for sure. That's pretty absurd, but also very, very familiar if you spend any time in these sorts of places. So I was on Team Odds Shark for a few years. Odds Shark flew me out, and several other national NFL journalists several years in a row staked us in the Westgate Super Contest. And if you don't know, that's kind of like the Super Bowl of NFL betting. You put down pretty decent chunk of money, and then you pick 5 every single week right at the end of the year. So we always have a big weekend because you have to go and do it in person, right? And so it was a big thing. And me and several other national NFL writers ended up on the blackjack tables. We had a nice night. And then me and one other writer kept going, and we were running out of money, and it was getting late. And I'm like, oh, okay, I think I'm done. He said, no, do one more shoe with me. I'm like, one more shoe, which is like, another whole round of decks to be played. I'm like, okay. Oh, and then we go on this massive hot streak. We play till like 3 in the morning. I'm up like 500. He's up like 800. And I'm like, all right, cool. I go to cash out. And on the way back, I see him at the roulette table, and I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, dude. And he's like, no, I'm just going to run it up another 100 real quick. And then I'll be done. And I'm like, dude, as your friend, I'm telling you, call it. I'm going to go get a burger. You get a burger. Like, go to your room. He's like, no, it's cool. I'm like, okay. The next day, we got to go up and register for the thing, and I meet him at the suite. And, like, I walk in, and I lock eyes, and I know before I even say anything. And I go, so what? He goes, I lost every penny. I'm like, dude, no. I tried to warn you.
Unfortunately, like you said, that's a very common story for gambling as a whole. That's one thing that we'll probably get into more on either on this show or Sports Intel or both, because it'd be interesting because Shayne, you played in an era that you couldn't even talk about that on TV. Al Michaels always refers to this because he's been in the game for so long, and so it's still weird for him to do, like, I don't know, whatever the advertisement is, whatever the ad read is, and so it has to be, even for you, which you didn't play that long ago, it has to be odd to see how infiltrating that element of gambling has been into the game. It was always there. You knew it was there in the background. Obviously, you never dealt with it, but it was there in the background. You knew people were betting on games. But now it's stark for me to watch as a longtime football fan to see all these ads running and right in the middle of the game.
It's funny. We always had this meeting at the beginning of the year where they would come in and talk to us and tell us, these are things you can and can't do, blah blah blah. We were told to not even associate with known gamblers. Okay, imagine that world today. Who the heck are you going to talk to, right?
Yeah.
When we would go to casinos, they couldn't tell us we couldn't go to casinos. But when we did, we were technically not allowed to take comps for a hotel or like, and it's like, come on, we all did it. And I can promise you, every time I went, I accepted any of that, but technically we were told we were not supposed to because they didn't want anyone to fall under the favor of a debt or a favor or whatever. And I get where they're going, a little bit of like hyper paranoia along the lines of, moral turpitude and all that kind of stuff. But now, I mean, sports gambling companies have suites in these stadiums, and it's crazy.
Yeah, it's all they used to have it where you couldn't say anything, and now it's like the brand. They're saying the brand on the air and then throwing it to commercial, and then it's like you can't avoid it even if you're trying to, and it's just wild to me. I'm not a gambler on sports at all. I've never really done it and never really been interested in it. I just like watching it for kind of the purity of the game and interest. But it's just an interesting thing to deal with. I think on my show coming up on Sports Intel, I've got one of my buddies is the lawyer that was responsible for helping to bring sports gambling to Michigan. So I kind of want to get that angle on it. But it's interesting stuff. I didn't realize that was part. I know you've got a lot of things in your history, Ty, but I didn't realize that was part of your background too, as kind of the overlap with the gambling circles, which now is completely overlapped with sports, as we're saying.
Yeah, well, I was like you. I love the game. I love the competition. I love, history and fan passion and all that stuff, right? Like, that's what I watch it for. And I didn't like people talking about gambling and insisting that everybody gambled, and I'm like, no, and you can kind of see the corrosive effects it has in other sports and other places in the world, right? So when I started doing more research on it, I actually did a big, long investigative piece for Bleacher Report. They didn't actually run it, but I talked to a lot of people who are connected in that world, and the kind of the movement was already happening towards legalizing, right? And then I started getting into it. Out of the blue, Odds Shark called me up because they saw that I cited their odds. Somebody said to me, hey, I had a couple of readers go, hey, when you call one team the favorite, because they're like the Patriots, and everybody thinks the Patriots are the best team, but they're actually supposed to lose this game because of the spot and the weather and whatever else, if they were actually intended to lose, and you say, oh, that's an upset, like, you sound like an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. And wow, that's a good point, actually. So I started looking into it, and I made sure to cite odds correctly, and just from that, they approached me, and so I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to go participate in this, I better learn how to do this. And I got really interested in, actually, in order to handicap and predict sports, well, you really have to know what you're talking about. You really have to know the factors that affect winning and losing, and you have to know your stats, and you have to be able to fit things into models and account for variance and all this sort of stuff. So I really enjoy handicapping as an exercise. I also enjoyed it a little bit more. My first year I didn't do so great. The second year I finished in the money. So I finished tied for 10th out of 1,800 people, which is how high you had to be to finish in the money in those days. And so I went, hey, this isn't the worst thing in the world, right? But, I think it's very clear to see. And, as Lions fans around the state saw last year with multiple players getting suspended for, you accessed the, FanDuel, DraftKings, whatever it is, app from your hotel room in the team hotel during a road trip, and you bet on college football. Well, that's doing sports gambling from a team facility because it's like, man, come on, what are we doing here? What are we doing? Who are we kidding, right? Like, it's ridiculous how they're trying to keep that same sort of firewall and pretend like those interests aren't totally woven into the fabric of the game now.
That's the main thing for me, where it's like, okay, we're gonna let these people in, and kind of like you were saying, Shayne, we're gonna let these people in, but don't consort with them. Don't do it yourself. It's like, well, how do we avoid this? There's ads and things every other break, every other place you go to, everything is branded to this. And so that kind of seems like the comp thing back in your day. It's like, yeah, you're putting these parameters on. Of course, there's got to be parameters on the games that they're actually, playing, and the NFL, the sanctity of the game, all of that. But yeah, college, like Ty's saying, college football, that's totally unrelated. There's everybody else is able to do it, but they're not able to do it under these certain. That book has gotten a lot thicker, I think, since your day with those briefings at the beginning of the beginning of the team meeting there.
Yeah, and what's funny is we always felt like we had to be careful if we made locker room bets on our alma maters, because I played on teams with guys that, went to my rival or went to my conference rival or went to whatever, and maybe they're going to play each other that week. And we would make bets, and we were told, hey, don't put this on social media. And it's like, okay, well, we might have had a couple $100, $500 bets on certain things with certain guys, but then a few of us would always make them fun bets, and it was like, for me, I remember Matt Schaub. This is when I was in Houston, and he was our quarterback. He played at UVA. I went to Virginia Tech. At the time, I think UVA has beaten Virginia Tech once since Matt Schaub beat them in like 2002 or 3 or 4. So like in the 2000s, UVA has beaten us 2 times. And he made a bet with me, and he said, you wear my jersey if we win, and I said, you wear my jersey. So I brought him in my 1999 tight, as you can imagine, jersey for him to wear, and he had to wear it around the locker room for the and meetings and everything for the entire day. So, but they were like, just don't post about this on social media. And I'm like, It's that big a deal. And even college guys, like I got into college coaching after I retired from playing, and they had their compliance meeting and the rules meetings and told them what they can and can't do. And they were told, you're not allowed to gamble on any sport unless the NCAA does not sanction it. So basically, you can bet on horse racing if you go to a track, but that's all you can do.
There you go. That won't give you a gambling problem if you start gambling on horse racing. Yeah, that's funny.
Good, clean family fun.
Exactly. That's
playing the ponies.
That's funny. Well, and now that is a social media thing because they just did it with was it Hutchinson and St. Brown tie that did the USC Michigan game?
Yes. Yeah.
So and now that was all over social media and regular media and all of that. So yeah, times have indeed changed. Well, this was an interesting segment. I did not think we were going to get into sports gambling, but it was an interesting conversation, especially with everything going on the basketball side more so. And thankfully, we haven't had a lot of issues with the Lions this year with the gambling. But we got to take a quick break. We'll come back with Ty and talk about his outlook on the Lions and how that Pride of Detroit Movember campaign is going. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. I'm back here with Ty Schalter of Pride of Detroit. And Ty, I thought that was a good article about, you always have a great knack for kind of writing the things that other people aren't really writing on the Lions beat. And I liked that article because it was interesting to me, speaking of the sports books, to look at the odds for the Lions and the Packers with their upcoming matchup, and then now the Bears, because the guy that covers the Bears for us is a buddy of mine, and when he came on at the beginning of the season, he was basically ready to write off the season because they had lost to Minnesota, and then they had the game against Detroit, and he's like, it's over. He's also a Penn State guy, so he was he was in very rough shape. So I've been doing checkups on him, but now the Bears have recovered because I told him at the beginning of the season, I said, Rob, I really think that this team has a chance to be top of the division or bottom of the division, kind of like everybody else, depending on how this breaks. There's a narrative that each team could have been on top, and I feel like that's where we are through this many games, because it's like, well, now what do we do with this? They're all kind of in a pack, and you don't know what to do with really any of the teams. And I thought your point was valid that, hey, the Lions are kind of roughly where we thought, especially because they're, again, like last year, dealing with a whole host of injuries.
Yeah, and I think, like I said in the article, like I kind of say all the time, when you look at statistically scoring differential, yards per play, those kind of metrics, DVOA, like when you're measuring team strength beyond who scores the most points when the clock hits zero, right? You can tell that sometimes teams are outplaying their record or underplaying their record. And at the end of the year, last year, Lions were 15-2, and I think everybody recognized that maybe they won a couple of games they didn't have any business winning, especially when they were managing to just kind of barely hold things together on defense there at the end. A lot of injuries. It's to their credit, obviously, right? It's to the coaching staff's credit, the players' credit. They were able to kind of next man up their way through all the way, get that number one seed. And I think, as Dan Campbell pointed out, maybe they made getting the number one seed too big a goal, because then they got a week off and they felt like they accomplished what they wanted to accomplish, right? So I think a lot of people had the idea that come back and go, okay, you overplayed your scoring margin by 2 whole expected wins. Generally speaking, historically speaking, that means you're more likely to underperform, right? Also have what looked like a meat grinder of a schedule has proven to be a meat grinder of a schedule. And so now you're sitting there at 6-4. Well, Vegas hit the over-under at 10.5. Most statistical models had the Lions somewhere between 10 and 11 wins this year. I think a lot of people understood the Lions could be just as good as they were last year, or even a little bit better, or just a little bit worse, and still only win 9, 10, 11 games. But also, the schedule is a meat grinder because the NFC North got handed a meat grinder of a schedule, and they all got to play each other, and 10, 11 wins might be enough. And here we are sitting at 6-4. You look at the stretch run. Okay, you got a 3-game homestand. Packers in the middle there. Giants and Cowboys. You go 2-1 or 3-0 in that stretch, and you get a shot at the Rams to try and maybe get back in the driver's seat for the number one seed. And then you got a couple division opponents to wrap up with the Steelers there at home. So you go, this is very doable. The Lions are in very good position. They're top 5 offense pretty much across the board, top 10 and climbing defense pretty much across the board, right? There are 25 teams 30 teams, not quite 30, 25, 26 teams that would trade places with the Lions in a heartbeat. And yeah, okay, you go to NFL.com/playoff picture or whatever, and the Lions are out of it right at this instant. But this may well be as grim as the picture gets.
I think that's a great way to look at it, because the defense thing is amazing to me, because I know we went through this a lot last year. We had Dr. Liao, I think, on the show more than any other Lions guest, because we had to keep talking about injuries. He's also fun to have on the show, and he likes to talk about food, so it's a good fit for the show, speaking of the upcoming Thanksgiving thing. But it is amazing that they have a different – I think it's important to highlight that the injuries are different this year. They had a lot of injuries where those guys were not coming back. Now you've got a scenario where the guys are returning for the most part, and these other guys that have been in there, the Legion of Whom, that seems to have your name written all over it, Ty. The Legion of Whom. Please tell me you came up with that.
I wish. A classic, like, oh man, I wish I thought of that. So good. But yeah, no, this defense has been able to patch holes for each other, and also we had the Brian Branch suspension in there, right? But it's people stepping up, people playing better. Jack Campbell, has been gigantic. Him and Anzalone together have been able to really cover an enormous amount of field. Derek Barnes, they could lose him for a little bit. Marcus Davenport, I think a lot of fans went, hey, whatever we get from Davenport's a bonus, right? And sure enough, he's been out, but he'll be coming back. Malcolm Rodriguez is going to come in and be another big gap filler, a guy who can play a significant role in a lot of different ways and a lot of different downs. And DJ Reed, can't believe that this is a big free agent signing, right? And they've been not missing him. He's been not. Terrion Arnold keeps going in and out. It seems like every time he comes in, he plays better and he goes out faster. You go, he's figuring it out. He just needs the reps, right? So when you were sitting there stressed about cornerback depth all last season, all off season, all the moves they made, and now you're going, hey, yeah, cornerback depth, you might want to stress about it, but the guys who are needing to step up are stepping up, and I think that goes to Kelvin Shepherd. The job he's doing, the coverages that he's calling, the way he's anticipating and being flexible and multiple and showing quarterbacks different looks, showing them one look, then switching it out and showing them something else, blending man and zone in ways that we hadn't seen before. And I think that's really kept quarterbacks off balance. That's helped the defensive line, who, by the way, the defensive line playing really, really disciplined this year, right? They're not selling out to get pressure, but they're getting pressure. They're managing to keep contained. At one point, at least of a couple of weeks ago, they were the second slowest average time to pressure, yet the seventh highest pressure rate in the league, right? Because they're being disciplined and they're shrinking that pocket without blowing open a hole that the quarterback can step up into or run through, as we used to see a lot before.
That alignment with McNeil at the edge, I think, might be my favorite, just because that's the kid. Not for the long term, but I liked that as a look because, like you said, he's varying the looks. Shayne, this is always something that's interested me about football in general, and you must have seen this a lot because you know better than anybody that 53-man roster, there's a reason that all those guys made that roster, and you've got the practice squad guys, and you've got guys that are very capable that just missed the cut or what have you. There's a lot of elite players that are in camp, and there's something to be said. You never want to go through injuries, but there's something to be said for what the Lions are going through right now. You have the injuries kind of at the right time. If they can make their way into the playoffs as a sneaky lower seed, maybe they can get up to a higher seed like Ty was saying, but as long as they make the playoffs and then they get the guys healthy, now not only do you have your starters back, but you've got guys that are battle tested at those depth positions that if they have to go in for a play for 10 plays, or maybe they played their way onto the field and took somebody else's role and said, no, you can't take me off now I'm in the rotation. I feel like Roy Lopez and some of the other guys are doing that on the Lions currently. That's a real way to raise the strength of your team overall, because while the other guys are resting and healthy for the playoffs, maybe 1 through 10, 10 guys out of your top 20 guys, now your bottom 20 have all been strengthened because they've been forced into action.
I mean, you look on the sidelines during an NFL game, it's completely different than when you look in a college game. You have 45 active players on game day. You do the math on that, that's 22 on each. So you have at least it should be, right? 11 starters and 11 backups. Some of those backups might have to back up on 2 positions.
Right.
Okay, because out of those 45, you would think if you went 1 deep at every position, that's 44. What ends up happening is you've got a kicker, you've got a punter, you've got a long snapper. There's 3. Take that out. So those backups not only have to be adequate, they have to be guys that they could count on to start if they have to start, but also put a role on special teams. Or they are going to be a guy that can cover, block, tackle, all those kind of things. But the availability to be available and to be healthy is such a huge factor, but you have to know that there's a next man up. And that next man up could be Wally Pipp. You never know who it is, right? Or the next man up could be not Wally Pipp, because that aspirin obviously cost him a lot of money. He actually succeeded after that, but after that, you never heard of it because Lou Gehrig was the next guy up, right? But you never know who the next Lou Gehrig is. And I think that's something we see in this league. We see a lot of guys step up and like, who knew, right? And when people step up and they use the best, use the opportunity that they get the best, that's what creates, we don't reload, or we don't rebuild, we reload, or whatever. But you always have to make sure that you're always looking to make sure that your backups are getting enough reps so that they're ready to step in. But when guys get hurt, they're doing everything they can to get back healthy. But everyone has to try to fill that role that they're in. And availability is one of the top priorities of anyone's career, is how available can I be when I'm needed.
The classic Charles Barkley line, I'm sure other people have said it, but yeah, the best ability is availability.
Yes.
Ty, you're a Lions historian here, but I don't know if you know that there's a story that Shayne told us before about, he was basically in a similar scenario to what he just explained with Jason Hanson, where he had a tryout and Jason said, "Nah, I don't like how this is looking. This is looking a little too good. I got to make sure to get out here."
Yeah, that was a funny time because Jason respected me. We had known each other for quite a while. I believe he had wrecked a 4-wheeler or an ATV or something, really skinned his leg up pretty bad. And they were looking to sit him out for a week. So I, at the time, happened to be on the street as a free agent. They brought me in for a workout, had a really good workout. Jason was actually there. He was the guy that actually held the ball for me in the workout. And when it finished, he was like, "Yeah, I think I'm going to suck this one up because I don't want them to see that somebody else can do my job and blah blah blah." And I completely respect that, because that's that's a little bit of that Iron Man, a little bit of that I don't want to be Wally Pipped type situation.
I didn't have Jason Hanson on an ATV. I don't know what I'm doing to him there, but I just didn't have that.
He had some really random injuries over his career. I think he had it was an ATV. The one might have been a hatchet or a campfire. He had some weird injuries happen, but not too many happened on the field. Most of them, I think, were like random off the field occurrences.
Ty, I didn't have him as Bear Grylls here in the off season. Jason Hanson. I don't know if you did, but I
no.
I want to get your update here on and your thoughts on the Movember campaign here, because we've been doing a Pride of Detroit month. We're going to have Ryan on for Thanksgiving, and I want to get your take, because are there any things that you do in this part? I know most of them are Jeremy. He already got the tattoo, so now he might have to shave his head. I'm curious your thoughts of the punishments and what's going on there.
Oh yeah, this is awesome. It's something that's really, really cool. I've been doing it for 5 years now. Raised $50,000 for the Rogel Cancer Center last year, and last year I was kind of coming on board kind of right as the season started, right? This year I think I'm going to be a part of the year-end stream, the big year-end stream, which I believe is going to be on the 6th of December. When I say year-end, I'm sorry, the campaign and month-end stream, right? So it's great to see Jeremy willing to put himself through this $75,000 goal. That's one that he said he wouldn't do last year's. Shave his head. People are like, "Jeremy, you got to shave your head. You got to shave your head." And he's like, "You guys don't understand. I'm not like a 25-year-old blogger anymore. Like, this age, you shave your head, you don't know how much of it is coming back, right? But he's willing to go that extra mile for people to donate to a cause that's very near and dear to his heart, very near and dear to a lot of hearts for people around Michigan. Cancer treatment, just about everybody knows someone who that's touched in their life. And improving treatment, there's so many different types of cancers that have become so much more treatable. My wife's my sister-in-law, went through melanoma, and some of the treatments, if she'd gotten it 5 years earlier, it would have been a lot less likely she survived. And so there's just a ton of great research being done. I love to support it. And again, Jeremy doing up-downs, posted a blooper in the team Slack of him trying to do up-downs, had me on the floor a couple days ago. So, it's a ton of fun. Go to the Twitch streams. Go to the x.com/Pride of Detroit. They got a pin post there that has all the goals, all the ways to donate, all the ways to participate. I can't recommend it enough.
We'll post it on our social media too, but same here. I think Shayne will be interested in one because there's one I think that they have to field punts from Jake Bates. Somebody does at one level.
Yeah. Jeremy got the field punts from Jack Fox last year.
Jack Fox. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. And I think they're trying to expand the number of participants and what that looks like. It's pretty cool. And Jack's a great guy too. He's game.
Yeah, he is. I've worked with him. I've worked with Jack, and he's an awesome person, very talented punter as well. But if you've ever been someone to sit underneath of a punt and try to catch it, you realize just how hard it is and the respect you have to have for that position because. I can tell you when I played for the Saints, we had the Pelicans facility in the same parking lot, and those guys would come out to the field every now and then when we were kicking and the punters were punting, and they wanted to put their hand at us. So we were like, sure, bring it on out. And it was embarrassing to see those guys trying to catch punts. And we're talking about world-class athletes. So the average person trying to catch a punt, I want to be there. I want to see that.
That's why it's a great one. I knew you would like that when I knew you worked with Jack. So that's going to be a fun one. They've got a whole list of things, so we'll continue to promote it. We'll be talking with Ryan on Thanksgiving, and then we'll follow up on how it goes, especially after December 6th. But, Ty, we appreciate you joining the show, and we'll look forward to talking to you again, hopefully as they're approaching a playoff run here.
Absolutely, Ryan. Always a pleasure, man.
All right, thanks, Ty. We'll talk to you soon. All right, thanks to Ty Schalter. Appreciate him joining the show. We're going to move over to the Philadelphia side of things. Want to get Glenn Erby's take on what happened on his side. Obviously, they got the win, so we'll bring him on after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this guy again. He was great last week. Glenn Erby of the Eagles Wire and Ravens Wire. He contributes to both, and had a great interview with him before the game. He's got to be excited about the game. I don't know, Glenn. I've got a few things I want to talk with you about, but I guess the thing that surprised me, I don't know, sometimes it can be a sound quality issue with the weather, but man, that stadium seemed kind of tame for how big that game was, but maybe they were kind of cold.
I think it was a little bit of both. I think it was the cold. I think it was, the tightness from watching a situation where, once again, the offense struggled. So I think sometimes the fans were shell-shocked. I think it was a bit several things that played a factor into it.
That just kept sticking out to me because it wasn't one of those. The Eagles won the game, but it wasn't a romp. There wasn't a lot of high profile moments that maybe you'd cheer for as a fan. But it was just kind of odd, the mood there in general. We were talking with Shayne earlier about how to prep for that kind of game because the winds were obviously swirling and the kickers were having to deal with that. We were just talking about some of the returning elements in those games because Shayne, you had an interesting point about that maybe is good to bring to air because one of the amazing things about that game for me, the kind of low key things that not everybody's gonna watch and notice, but Khalif Raymond was great on the punt return with some difficult punts because you've got to be able to deal with that if you're a Jack Fox or if you're a Jake Bates kicking, but it's also the people returning that have to deal with that. And you were talking about as a former kicker, you also train returners on the angle and things, and that's got to change with those winds too.
Absolutely, because the ball breaks in the air, not just with the wind, but even if you're in a dome. You hit a perfect spiral and it turns over. You have to understand, if they're right-footed, the ball's going to break outside to your left as you're returning, because the spiral turns over and goes a certain way. Well, if the spiral doesn't turn over and the nose stays up, it's going to flutter and fall back in hard to your right. And you have to understand, when it breaks to the left, it's going to gain yardage. When it breaks to the right, it's actually going to almost lose yardage as it's dropping down. So there's different ways you have to judge, and a lot of that comes from experience. I mean, they've got jugs machines that can shoot the balls, and the guys can practice it all day long, but it creates a really hard thing. And Jack Fox is actually really good at showing that he's going to punt one direction, and he'll punt it the other direction. So you might think you're getting a read on his stance, and then all of a sudden you got to break across the field to catch the ball. But all returners are trying to watch film on those punters and try to get their tendencies and know how many balls turn over. I mean, I think PFF, Pro Football Focus, actually has a stat that tells you how many times a punter turns the ball over, so you can get their tendencies. And then you learn what distances are they normally getting in a dome, outside, against the wind, with the wind, all of those situations. And you have to use that to know, do I stand 40 yards back? Do I stand 45 yards back? All of those things kind of play into it. And then understanding the ball flight. And when it's windy, good luck. And you've got to basically be a baseball outfielder. And you can't backpedal. You got to turn and run, look over your shoulder. You've got to try to get there first and let the ball come to you. Or if not, you're reaching for it and it's going through your fingers because you don't have much of a backstop. Like, there's so many factors that play into it.
It's intriguing how much nuance there is to all of this stuff, because that's one of the things why I like talking with you about all this stuff, because we just see, oh, well, he dropped the punt, or oh, he shanked the punt out of bounds.
It's his job.
Yeah.
Why can't he do that?
Exactly. There's so much nuance that goes into it. We were having this conversation, Glenn, because the previous writer that we talked to from Pride of Detroit, they're doing a Movember charity campaign, and one of the things that they have to do if the money hits a certain level, which it already has, is they have to catch punts from Jack Fox, which I think is very interesting. So that's how we got into this conversation initially. But that didn't seem to bother Jake Elliott much in that game. Bates of the Jakes, it was a battle of the Jakes for that game, for the kicking matchup. But Elliott looked super solid in that matchup. He looked really confident in that wind.
Yeah, I mean, he's used to kicking in that when he's used to kicking in that stadium.
Absolutely,
he's a Pro Bowler. He's a veteran. So at this point, that's just second nature for Jake at this point.
So Jake's funny story. Jake's pro day at Memphis. Okay. It was really windy and really bad weather, and he did really well. And that's why the Bengals drafted him originally, is because they were so impressed with how well he did at his pro day. And maybe he didn't make the squad. But he obviously has shown himself to be quite the pro and quite the very talented kicker, who is probably going to have a very long career at Philadelphia. But he has done amazing, and you're correct. That outdoor experience every day in practice, but in games, is a huge advantage for him.
Yeah, he's spectacular. I mean, he's great. He's great at 50. He's great at long distance field goals. At one point, I thought he was maybe the second best kicker in the game. I know he's had some struggles, but he's definitely clutch when needed.
They're probably regretting, Shayne, that they moved on from him and had Randy Bullock instead. I guess that's who I mean, that there was a veteran guy. You kind of understand it at the time. You're not necessarily going to know that it's a Pro Bowler that's going to move on to the Eagles.
Well, I think at the time, Randy just did better in preseason training camp. I don't know all the parameters. I wasn't there every day for it, but Randy did not do horrible. He had some ups and he had a few downs, and he didn't do horrible. But I think Jake has done a great job, because he has kind of shown a lot of consistency and kept his downs very limited, and I think that's why he's somewhat of a David Aker-ish type icon now as far as kickers in Philadelphia.
Yeah, they continue to have strengths at every position. We saw that, Glenn, on Sunday. I mean, they just kind of outclassed the Lions to a degree, but I'm curious how you saw that game kind of from your side. Obviously, it ended up being a defensive battle, a little bit more than maybe we expected. We talked about a lot of the offensive weapons, but the defense kind of won the day on both sides. And right. But I'm curious, this is one reason we like to talk to people from the other side of things, because obviously a lot was made. None of these games come down to one call. There's a million plays in these games, but I'm curious what you thought of that call at the end, because you cover the Eagles, you're more on that side of things. Did you think that call against Yasin should have been a pass interference, or how did you see that from your side? Because obviously as Lions people, we're going to see it a certain way, so that's why I like to get your side to kind of even things out.
I think it's a tough call. I think I'd be getting right here lying if I was to say, well, yes, it was an obvious pass interference. I think in that instance, maybe the home team, maybe the all-pro wide receiver gets the nod. Maybe he got a makeup call from earlier instances where Rock Ya-Sin might have been a little bit aggressive. But I think on that final play, that play there, I would have been okay with the ref not making a call or not calling anything at all.
That's the big thing for me, because we could go back and forth about whether or not it is, and that's not really that important at this point. But I think we're probably all on the side of let them play so that they can decide the game, because no matter if the roles were reversed, I would have wanted that if it was a Lions receiver and it was the reverse scenario, and then they called it in benefit for the Lions. You just don't really want to see a game end that way. So I just wanted to get your take on that. But what'd you think of the game overall? Obviously, it was a good win for the Eagles, but what were some of your takeaways seeing that Lions squad and kind of the Eagles moving forward here, Glenn?
I think that Lions squad, it's very explosive. I wouldn't be shocked if they played again, if they met again. We had this conversation last week. I think the most important thing for me was the Eagles' ability to get pressure on Goff up the middle, and they were successful in that. They were successful with Jalen Carter. He's starting to get in shape. He's starting to round into form. He got pressure. Jordan Davis was the NFC Defensive Player of the Week for his 3 back down. So I think out of everything, being able to contain the running game, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to do his thing. He's an amazing dual threat, but not allowing him to just have those plays that he had the week prior, and then getting pressure on Goff up the middle was important, and then they did those things.
They took care of business, and like you said, that interior of that defensive line is amazing to me. Davis and Carter as that combination. We previewed them a little bit, but how do you see the Eagles' outlook now? Obviously, they're both of these divisions have tough schedules here. Correct. I don't know what the Eagles' remaining schedule is, but they haven't had an easy time, just like the NFC North teams haven't. But they're kind of putting themselves in the driver's seat, even though quietly out on the West Coast, there's a team out in LA that's kind of trying to pace things out there that we're all forgetting about if we're in the Midwest or the East Coast here.
Correct. I mean, I think that the Rams are someone, they played earlier in the season. They played in the playoffs. They're always a team that's there to watch. But, you have the Cowboys game coming up. You have Black Friday with the Bears, much improved team, playoff team. I wouldn't be shocked if they beat the Eagles. You still have to go to Buffalo. Still have 2 games with the Commanders, have a game with the Raiders, where who knows what could happen. So I think that, the schedule has been unforgiving this year. I think one of the big concerns is the defense is playing well. You have a championship defense, but at one point, is this offense going to click and look like it did at times last year? I understand the injuries. I understand the tough opponents you played, but I think that's the one thing, we're certain this team is going to make the playoffs, but how will they look entering the playoffs? How will they look against a team that's just as explosive and can score just as many points?
I'd love to see these two teams match up again. Not that the result would be different. We'll have to see. Like you said, the Lions kind of had some offensive scuffles. I wanted to talk about this on the show at some point. I just can't believe they went. It seemed like the Eagles were disguising their looks pretty well, because they kept trying to run it up the middle at key times. They had the fake punt where they tried to go up the middle. They had other key downs where they tried to go up the middle. And obviously they were seeing certain things where they thought that was a good idea, but I have a hard time going, okay, that's Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis up there. Let's just run in between them. I bet we can fit up there.
Well, I think as a whole, that unit is pretty good. Moro Ojomo, he's the lesser of the names of the 3, but we can argue he's been more consistent. He's the pass rusher of the group. Jalen Phillips, you can't underscore what he's done in the 2 games playing the edge rusher position. He's been an absolute monster. Brandon Graham played 10 snaps. 10 quality snaps. Jalix Hunt is solid. Nolan Williams came back and played solid snaps. So you have a really good front. You really can't underscore what Nakobe Dean brings to the running, to the defense, his physicality. You see in the one play with him and David Montgomery where he caused a sack on Jared Goff. So I think things are rounded in the form. They're looking solid at key positions. So I think it's a championship defense. That's the least of the concerns. Like we said, the offense is the biggest concern. Potentially that number 2 cornerback, when you have a team like the Lions with 2 or 3 explosive, pass catchers, that could be a concern. But overall, Vic Fangio has done a good job of calling things at the right time.
There was a big drop off this year. It seemed like because you have DeJean, who's in that more nickel flexible kind of safety role, and then obviously you got a shutdown guy in Quinyon Mitchell, and then Ringo seems to be coming into his own a bit. But yeah, that was a question mark that they tried to address at the trade deadline, but didn't really work. But like you said, they've got a lot of talent there, so I feel like that. I feel like this was probably a good week for the Eagles because then it kind of buried the A.J. Brown thing. He got a decent amount of targets. There wasn't any complaints there, and hopefully he's not going on Twitch anytime soon. Not that I really know what that is.
I wouldn't. I mean, it's still a conversation. I mean, it's been a conversation every day this week. There's been a conversation about Jalen Hurts and his accountability, whether he's scared to throw passes, or scared to test defenses, whether he's trying to hold on to the ball, not turn the ball over. So even with the targets, the fact that he didn't go over 100 yards, the fact that he didn't have an explosive play, yards after the catch, it's still an ongoing daily conversation.
Yeah, I think this is part of the A.J. Brown experience, especially with the Eagles, that it's never truly going to die down, and he's kind of more in that diva receiver role that we talked about a little bit last week. But yeah, I'm hoping, Glenn, that we can get you back on the calendar because I'm hoping we'll see you in the playoffs as we talked about last week. But in between then, be sure to tell people where to follow you for both the Ravens and the Eagles coverage because you do a great job with both.
I appreciate you guys again for having me on anytime. Let me know. We can come on. We can talk about whatever, but you can find me at the Eagles Wire, the Ravens Wire, USAtoday.com, the Cover 2 NFL on Twitter, and we'll be around. I expect both these teams to do a play again. Hopefully it'll be in Philadelphia. I'd hate to see these 2 teams match up on that turf in Detroit, but I expect, both teams to make the playoffs, both teams to make deep runs, and I expect these 2 teams to face off again.
And I wouldn't count out that other team that you cover either, because they've been kind of lying in the weeds. But with Lamar Jackson back, I think they could be kind of shooting up the charts here.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I talked about it today. I think it's a race to 10. There are 7 games left, but I feel like 10 gets you into that AFC playoff field. But I wouldn't be shocked if they only lost 1 or 2 more down the stretch. They're getting healthier, and for them, it'd be about getting into the postseason and then actually, making something happen in the postseason, especially for Lamar Jackson.
And if people are taking bets, I'm taking Lamar Jackson over Aaron Rodgers right now. But that's a little bit biased. I've never been a big Rodgers fan. So, but appreciate you joining the show, Glenn. And hopefully we'll talk to you again soon. But we'll be sure to follow your coverage. And and we appreciate it. Hopefully we'll see you down the road.
Definitely. Thank you and Shayne again for having me on. Huge fans of your show. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Glenn. Take care.
Thank you. Yes.
All right, thanks to Glenn Erby. We appreciate him joining us. That was a good conversation with him again. We'll take a quick break, and then I've got a random question. We were talking about Twitch. I got a random question for Shayne after the break. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. We were going to take a quick segment here, but I think we got Jacob on the line, which I'm happy about because we were talking with Glenn Erby of Eagles Wire, and we were talking about the A.J. Brown thing in the aftermath of the we already got you laughing with the Lions-Eagles game. But since Shayne's here, I was curious because I don't know. I made a joke on air that I don't really know. I kind of get what Twitch is, but I'm not a big gamer. I know it's a streaming platform to watch other people play video games, which I wasn't even one to really sit down and play video games myself. So taking another step back would be kind of tough for me. And unless they're playing Tecmo Super Bowl, that I would not be interested in whatever anybody's playing, because Shayne referred to a bunch of older kickers that I played with them on Tecmo Super Bowl. But I'm curious, Shayne, this is the random question I was going to ask you. Have you ever played a video game as yourself? Have you ever gone on Madden and been for the appropriate year and been the Cincinnati Bengals and kicked a Shayne Graham?
The only time I've ever done that is so I'm not a gamer. Haven't owned a console in my adult life. So when I was in college, we had friends in the dorms that were playing, and this was back when there was a such thing as NCAA. You could actually play with yourself as your university team or whatever. You just didn't have your name on the back of your nameplate. So then, yes, I probably played around with that a little bit using myself. I've done it, but probably one of the earlier Madden versions when I was on there. I think when they came out with a new version a couple years ago, they had I don't know if it was a Legend or Legacy, where they brought back old players. So I was brought back onto the game, and I had a full profile. And
nice.
I guess I had a pretty good score, I had a friend playing when I was there. I took one kick. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I said, I'm done. I'll watch you guys do this. I just never got into video games. I love watching my friends play. I love watching kids play, but I don't play them good enough to get good at them. So I don't like to lose. So I don't want to lose enough to get good at it.
I understand that. Yeah, the competition still that is probably thick within you. The competition. So, and once they went beyond 2-button games, they kind of lost me. So I'm kind of in your same category. Are you a gamer? This is Jacob Westendorf, by the way, of Packers on SI, friend of the show. He covers the Packers for us and does it well. And he's also going to be part of the Thanksgiving show. So we'll be talking about that. But do you game? I don't know if you strike me as a gamer.
Yeah, not really. When I was younger, my dad, my brother, and we played Metal Gear Solid. If you guys are familiar with that, it's tactical espionage. They've made about 5 different iterations of it just on PlayStation. It was a PC game before that. So it's that is my all-time favorite, kind of a bonding thing with my dad way back when, too. And then, your Maddens and stuff like that. But now I own a PlayStation 3. And it is solely because for the longest time, that was the only way I could play. So the original MGS came out on the initial PlayStation, and you couldn't play that on the 4 or the 5. So I didn't really care to get the new consoles. And then when I looked at the PlayStation 5, I cannot justify spending $500 on most things. I definitely can't justify spending $500 on something that I got 2 kids under the age of 7. So, my spare time is watching Baby Shark and whatever other nonsense. The stupid 6'7" meme is taking over my life.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm very confused by that one too. So I'm glad we're all equally out of touch, I guess, with all of this stuff. But yeah, we got into the conversation because it's just funny how news breaks sometimes, because the modern day cracks me up, because this whole AJ Brown thing happened because he was on a Twitch stream and then he said a comment on there. Like it'd be funny to see the old news people kind of trying to take in how things work nowadays. But your ears might have been burning because we were talking about the Ravens and possibly going on a run. And I was saying I would bet on Lamar Jackson over your old buddy Aaron Rodgers, because as you know, I'm not a big fan, and he might be fading down the stretch. So I'm curious how you're taking in the Aaron Rodgers experience now that he's in the black and gold here.
Yeah, I've paid enough attention. Usually, if they're not on when the Packers are playing, because when the Packers are playing, that pretty much consumes about 6 hours or so of my football Sunday. So if I'm ever able to catch him, I try to. Obviously, saw him when he played Green Bay that Sunday night game. The Packers kind of kicked the crap out of him a little bit, but. Hoping he gets to play Sunday because he's playing in Chicago. So I know that is something that matters to him. And I know if Lions fans feel a certain type of way about Aaron Rodgers, I know Chicago fans feel a certain type of way about Rodgers as well. So I'm with you, though. I think that for everybody saying like, oh, he looks great, he should come back, all that stuff, my thought is, let me see what happens when the weather turns. Because the last game I ever saw Rodgers play in person was the Sunday night game between Green Bay and the Lions at Lambeau. And I remember coming out of that game saying, man, I don't think Rodgers wants to play like in the elements anymore. So that's kind of why I thought maybe as his career went to the next stage, he'd want to find maybe a dome team or something like that. But he hasn't, obviously picking the Jets and the Steelers from this time frame. But I just want to see, how does he play in the cold? Does he look like old quarterbacks tend to look older when they get in the cold, unless your name is Tom Brady? And then otherwise, I'm with you. I think Lamar Jackson and the Ravens are a team that they could have been buried, and they haven't been. The Steelers losing a couple games that maybe they could have won has kept the Ravens in it, and I think they're going to end up paying the price for that.
Who knew we were going to have these kind of rooting interests with the whole Rodgers versus the Bears thing? Because one of your equivalent that covers the Bears for us, I was telling him at the beginning of the season, like, hey, I could see this team finishing on top depending on how the division ends up, and he was saying no, that's the one slot that they couldn't be in, because I was saying they could be worst or first. And not that they're the odds-on favorite, but they are currently sitting atop the division. I think the Packers and Lions are currently sitting with better odds, but it's an up and down division, and they're now getting compressed there in the middle. So I thought you had a good article, Jacob, about Micah Parsons and that trade, and how the trade has worked out well from Parsons' performance standpoint, but it hasn't necessarily netted the results that you'd hope for from a defensive change standpoint and upgrading the defense as a whole. That first game, it looked like it against the Lions, but it's been the returns haven't been quite as large in some of the recent weeks.
Yeah, they're much more good than bad. Sometimes it certainly doesn't feel that way. This past week against the Giants was a lot of gritting of teeth and everything like that, but the final numbers look really good. The problem with the Packers is they haven't made a lot of negative plays in the run game or the passing game, and especially the last couple of weeks, if it's not Parsons affecting the quarterback, then the other guys aren't. Rashawn Gary hasn't had a sack. I don't think he's had a quarterback hit since the game he had against the Steelers, where he had a couple of sacks in that game as well. Devontae Wyatt is kind of going off the trend of his career so far, which is he starts fast, he gets dinged, and then he's not the same player. And then the secondary that Green Bay has, the cornerback position specifically, there's just not a lot of ball skills with those corners. And you saw this weekend, if you guys caught any of that Packers game, they had 5 chances to pick off Jameis Winston, 5 passes that literally hit DBs in the hands, and they caught one of them. So there was the last one, so I guess in that way it ended the game. But during the game, that could have been a game. The final score was 38-3, but since they didn't catch the ball, that kept the game a heck of a lot closer than it probably should have been. But they've said that they think they're going to be a really good unit. This would be a good week to prove it, because old friend of the state of Michigan, J.J. McCarthy, is not off to the start that the Vikings or anybody else has hoped for. And then, like you said, next week they've got that big showdown. In my opinion, what could be the biggest game of the season right now against the Detroit Lions on Thanksgiving Day. The winner of that game may very well decide the winner of this division.
Those are all good points. We're a break behind, so we got to take a quick break. But I want to talk about some of those through threads there, because the Lions have the matchup with the Giants in between. Then, like you said, the bigger matchup with the Packers. Do the Giants become a bit of a trap game? And then I want to talk about JJ and Michigan with you a little bit. So we'll come back with Jacob Westendorf of Packers on SI. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Jacob is obviously an expert on the Packers side of things, but he's a Michigan guy. We often cover Michigan with him. And yeah, I'm curious how you kind of see both sides of that. Michigan's had a little bit of an up and down year. It sounds like we talked about them at the beginning of the year. It sounds like they've kind of been in the range that you expected, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that. And I'm curious how you've taken in J.J. McCarthy, because we talked about it with our Vikings analysts, but that situation has been fascinating to me, because at one point they had Daniel Jones, Sam Darnold, and J.J. McCarthy, obviously on injured reserve, on the roster at the same time. And now you look at what Darnold now Darnold and Jones are both in the running for MVP, comeback player of the year for Daniel Jones, and JJ has struggled. I think some of that is the offensive line issues and other things, but I'm curious what you think of after watching him at Michigan, what he's doing in the pros, and what you're seeing of the Michigan program here so far.
Yeah, so starting with McCarthy, from a fan's perspective, it's fine because, McCarthy is playing for enemy colors, so to speak. So, you don't want him to do well because that means the Vikings are doing well. And nothing he does in the pros changes anything that he did at Michigan as far as I'm concerned. So that part doesn't matter so much to me. But it's been rough, and I know that there were people in Minnesota's building. You mentioned Darnold and you mentioned Daniel Jones. I know there were people in Minnesota who wanted Aaron Rodgers. And they were kind of split on whether they wanted to bring in someone like Rodgers or let the McCarthy experience play out. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic at the end of the season if this Viking season ends up failing, just because, we could get to the end of the year and how bad it is. I mean, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Minnesota turns the keys to Max Brosmer for the last couple games of the year and says, McCarthy, we're going to bring in some competition, which is wild to think. Just because he was a first-round pick, and I think him missing all of last year, meaning he couldn't practice, was a big factor in this as well. You've got McCarthy talking about how he's going to be rewired on how to play quarterback and everything like that since he's gotten to Minnesota. But the reality is, what's happening on the field is happening on the field, and that group that they have there, the skill group, at minimum, they're ahead of the curve with Justin Jefferson being on the team. The backfield is strong with Aaron Jones, the former Packer, and Jordan Mason in there as well. I know the offensive line's kind of been a little in and out, but they should be stabilized for now. He's just missing guys that are pretty open by NFL standards. And the thing about him at Michigan was he was asked to do a little. He wasn't asked to do a lot. They said he could have done more if they asked him to. I do believe that. But it's an adjustment going to the NFL when they're asking you to do more stuff. So he's got to play better. The Vikings got to play better. As far as Michigan, the program goes, I was at Wrigley Field on Saturday for that debacle, I guess is what you could call it. I'm happy they escaped with a win. It's not often you see a team, probably never, honestly, that turns the ball over 5 times in one game and is able to come away with a victory. Thankfully, they were. I think if your expectations were realistic coming into the season, I think you're feeling pretty good about the team. Reality is they should beat Maryland on Saturday. If they do that, at minimum, they're going to finish 9-3. And, maybe the winning streak against Ohio State ends in a couple of weeks, and that's not going to be fun for anybody who's rooting for not Ohio State in that game. But, that's something that I don't want to say you expect it every year, but is the quarterback getting better? I think the answer to that question is yes. Does the passing game not look as elementary as it did early in the season? I think the answer is yes. They've got 2 really good backs, and they've played so many young guys that have gotten better over the following years. This is kind of what growing pains look like. I thought Joel Klatt said it well. If you're going to compare every Michigan team from here on out to the 22 and 23 teams, you're probably going to be disappointed a heck of a lot more than you're feeling really good about those expectations. But hopefully they're able to build some stuff here in the future. They've got another good recruiting class coming in, and the way that the season's gone this year, like I said, if you'd have told me before the year, they're 9-2 going into the Ohio State game, and if they win, they get into the college football playoff, I'd have told you that is a wild success of a season.
We talked about it at the beginning of the season, but they have a young team, and so I think they're progressing throughout the season. I think anything loftier
and
expectations.
They've gotten younger as the season has gone on,
right,
because the older offensive linemen have been hurt. They put in newer guys, so they've gotten younger since they started the year. Usually it goes the other way.
And you're getting guys experience for the coming years, which is nice. So that'll be interesting to watch. But we always like to get your Michigan takes. But obviously, the main reason you're here is the Packers side of things. And you mentioned the Jameis Winston. So obviously, the Packers just played the Giants. Now the Lions play the Giants and then play the Packers within a few days here. I'm a little disappointed. It looks like it's trending to the fact that we're not going to have the Jameis Winston experience against the Lions. You guys had it, so I can't get a ton of scouting from you because it looks like they may face off against Jackson Dart. But that was it looks like the Giants gave the Packers a little bit more of a run than you probably expected before the game.
Yeah, like I said, if the Packers, and if ifs and buts for candy and nuts, of course, but if the Packers defensive backs can catch the ball that's thrown to them, the game's not close, but they didn't. So because of that and other reasons, of course, It was. Green Bay was trailing in the fourth quarter. They had to have a touchdown pass from Jordan Love to Christian Watson with like 5 minutes or less left on the clock to be able to win that game. So it was kind of a death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of game, and the Packers didn't capitalize on the mistakes that the Giants made. And with a interim coach, a younger quarterback, or a newer quarterback, I shouldn't say younger, but he was new to them, third-string quarterback, they just weren't going to be a team that was going to try and win that game 17-14 and punt on 4th and 2 and 4th and 1s, and they converted a couple fourth downs and everything like that. They hit a couple big plays on the first drive of the game in the passing game. But, I mean, overall, not a great game by Green Bay standards, and they have kind of been up and down over the last really 6 weeks or so from that side of things. But the Giants are not a very good football team. They've got a couple good players in some good spots. They are better when Jackson Dart plays. So if the Lions are going to get that experience, it's a completely different game than the one if Jameis Winston is on the field. I don't know how much Giants football you guys have watched. I've watched a couple. I think Jackson Dart has the goods, and I think he's going to be a really good quarterback in this league if he can figure out a way to stay on the field and out of the concussion protocol. So that's something that could give the Lions a bit of a challenge. The defensive line is something that can wreck the game. The Giants' defensive line is really good, especially Brian Burns is one of the leaders in the league in sacks. Abdul Carter is really good. Dexter Lawrence is really good. And I know, I watched Sunday Night Football between the Lions and the Eagles pretty closely, and that was the one thing where Jared Goff, if he has something about him that is his kryptonite, it is pressure. And if you make him move off of his spot, he can get rattled. Sometimes he's really cool and collected in that pocket, but he can get rattled in those situations, and that's something the Giants can do. I don't think they're going to be able to do it enough to beat the Lions or anything crazy like that, but that is something that, if you're talking about worries from Detroit facing off against the Giants, that's certainly one of them.
I'm glad you mentioned that because we didn't have anybody on the show to preview the Giants, and it's not that we're skipping them because obviously we wanted to feature the Packers matchup because we have you in the fold and you do a great job talking about all football. But I'm glad you're mentioning the Giants because it could be a sneaky trap game for the Lions because obviously, as you said, the Packers-Lions matchup is huge, but they both have to play a game in between. You guys have the Vikings, the Lions have the Giants, and with Dart and with that defensive line, I feel like you highlighted the two things. Obviously, the other thing was Scadaboo. They're being hit by injuries as well. Neighbors is out, Scadaboo's out, but they still have a lot of weapons, especially on that defense, and they do have some things to shore up, they being the Lions, on the interior of that offensive line and getting those assignments right. And I could see the Giants wreaking up some similar havoc. They might not be exactly Carter and Davis, but they do have a strong defensive front, and they might be able to keep that game close. That's why I wanted Winston, because I agree with you. I think Dart is for real, and I wanted 5 balls to go to the Lions. Not that they would have caught all of them either, but hopefully they'd catch one, and because that's part of the Jameis Winston experience. This was my honest reaction when you said 5 balls were thrown directly at the Packers. I said in my head, only 5? That's pretty low, actually, for the Jameis Winston experience, and he still kept the game close, which is hilarious to me. I just like that experience as a whole because it's like a lot of big plays both ways when you have Winston in there.
Yeah, he's a 30-30 guy. He's like a volume. I remember that this was something they said about Antoine Walker. He used to play for the Celtics and the Mavericks and a couple teams. He'll shoot you into a game and he'll shoot you out of a game. So that's the Jameis experience, to be sure. One other good thing that's going for Detroit this week, the Giants, had Josh Jacobs been able to finish the game on Sunday, I think he would have gone well over 100 yards. He got hurt on the first series of the game and did not return. His first couple carries, he looked explosive, looked like he had some holes to run through and everything like that. Detroit, if they're able to block him up, this Giants defensive team, they're like towards the bottom of the NFL. I don't remember the exact ranking anymore, but they are not a good team defending opposing run games. So Detroit, they kind of get off the bus running the football. They want Montgomery and they want Gibbs to be established. Honestly, if that's the way they need to go, this could be a game where those guys carry the ball between the two of them 30 to 35 times and they put up 200 plus.
I could see that because they are going to make a point of that, especially after their troubles kind of running it up the middle in the last game. No surprise there with that defensive front, but I think they will try to establish that and kind of slow the game down and take control of the game that way. But we got one more break to take. We're going to take another break and then come back and focus on the Packers and Lions in the preview. And we want to get Jacob in the discussion about our Thanksgiving draft. He's got to help us brainstorm with that. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Happy to bring Jacob back for a third segment here because we got a couple things to talk about here. We'll focus on the football first, but then we're going to do a little brainstorming. But I'm curious what you think of this game, Jacob. You always have a good read, a good objective read of your team, and the Packers are confusing to me a little bit. We talked about the defensive side of things, but you did highlight this when you were talking about some of the defensive players. They do seem like a bit of a team that some of the players have a tendency to fade a bit down the stretch or have kind of up and down times, which that's true for a lot of players. But I'm curious what you see as kind of the keys to the matchup, because the Lions are kind of in a similar boat. They've had a lot of injuries. They've had some issues there, and they're not coming in necessarily at full strength either. And of course, we had the Thanksgiving matchup that was a huge win for the Packers the last time they matched up on Thanksgiving. Yep. So there's that in the back of everybody's heads too.
Yeah, that Thanksgiving game you mentioned was kind of the turning point of Jordan Love's time as the starting quarterback, because at that point we were all kind of like, are we? How good is he? Are we sure? Are the Packers really going to commit big money to a guy who's kind of been up and down? If memory serves, I think Green Bay was 4-6 going into that game that year. They ended up beating Detroit and Kansas City back to back, which was just a huge boon to the rest of their season. But coming into this game against Detroit, and obviously one big injury could change, this comment. Like if Jordan Love doesn't play or if Jared Goff doesn't play, God forbid, knock on everything that you can, throw the salt over your shoulder, whatever anti-jinx thing you need there. If any of those guys don't play, then obviously this conversation changes drastically. But, I mean, with Green Bay coming in, the first game, I don't want to say you could throw it out because obviously it did happen, but there's a lot of things about that game that just is different now. Green Bay doesn't have the unknown on defense with Parsons being brand. Like, Parsons had been in Green Bay for like 8 days or something like that by the time these two teams had faced off the first time around. Aiden Hutchinson is fully removed now from his injury. Ali McNeil is back on the field. That's a big one, I think, for the Lions as well. And that interior offensive line, I think that's the biggest difference between the Lions from last year to this year is really, and I think it was undersold because we spent so much time talking about Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn leaving for head coaching jobs. But Frank Ragnow retiring before the season started was a huge deal, and they had to reshuffle that entire offensive line. And in that first game, you could tell there was some confusion. There's a play, Detroit's backed up, they run a run play, just trying to get some breathing room, and nobody blocks Green Bay's nose tackle, Colby Wooden. And, Gibbs, Montgomery, I don't remember who the back was, but he runs right into Wooden, and he's got no gain on the play. Like, those are kinds of things that I think will be shored up this time around. The concern I would have for the Lions is are they banged up in the secondary? I know DJ Reed is a maybe. Terry and Arnold has kind of been a maybe throughout the course of the year. Are they able to get those guys in the game? Because Green Bay, they don't have a number one guy, and I know that's a discussion point a bunch, but they've got quite a few guys that they like to go to. And Christian Watson, since coming back from injury, he didn't play the first time. He's kind of reemerged as one of their top guys, and he can certainly make some big plays down the field for Detroit or for Green Bay against Detroit's secondary. As far as like guys fading and stuff, Green Bay just needs to find other guys than Parsons just to make some plays for them. And they got that, in the first game. Edgerrin Cooper had one of his best games of the season. They held Jahmyr Gibbs to, I think it was 19 touches for 50 yards between runs and passes that he caught. They just didn't do a whole heck of a lot. St. Brown was quiet that day. Sam Laporta had a big game, but he's not going to play. He's on injured reserve, so I don't know what that'll change for the way Green Bay schemes things up against Detroit. But they need other guys than just Parsons. You mentioned that Thanksgiving game. That was one of the best games of Rashawn Gary's career. He had a 3-sack day. He strip-sacked Jared Goff. That was returned for a touchdown in that particular game. So those are the kinds of plays they need from a guy like him, especially with as much attention that's going to be paid to his running mate. In theory, that should open some things up for the other guys, if you will, on Green Bay's defense.
it does feel like there's a lot of moving pieces, even being a week out. There's obviously 2 games in between, for 1 game for each team. And I think you highlighted it really well, all of those differences. The line, that was a huge issue. I think the national narrative was that whole losing both coordinators thing. And although they're trying to figure out, especially the offensive side, Shepard has stepped in and done really well on the Lions side of things. But on the offensive side, they're still trying to figure that out, and we'll see what that iteration looks like, because this is going to be another tougher team if Campbell's taken over the play calling. But yeah, it'll be an interesting matchup, and it'll be a big one. We'll have to see how things play out this next weekend. But the last thing that, before I get a prediction from you here, because we always want to get that, but since you're going to be on Thanksgiving, we've been workshopping an idea where we do a Thanksgiving food draft, where we basically pick, like, we're open to ideas, but like a main course, a couple sides, maybe it's 2 main courses, whatever we do there. So my question is, would you be game, and do you have any suggestions for the format?
Yeah, I'm game. I think that the best way to do it is, usually there's a debate between 2 of the main courses. So I think asking somebody to pick 2 when there is only 2, it feels like a bit of a cop-out. So I would say, 1 main course, 2 sides, and then, so for example, gravy doesn't count as a side. So mashed potatoes and gravy, that's 1 side. And then 1 dessert. So what is that? I'm not good at math. That's 4
total.
4 things.
Yep.
4 total. I think that's the best way to do it, and you snake draft it. So if I really wanted pumpkin pie, I got to make sure I take that first overall or something like that.
See, yeah, you're giving away your strategy here. The other thing I'm
not a dessert guy, so no, I'm not.
Oh, good. That's smart. See, you're throwing some smoke our direction. This is a smoke screen.
Yes,
I like that. Well, the other thing we were thinking about including was a football element, and since you're a kind of ball is life kind of guy here, I'm curious if you have some advice on the football element. I was thinking, because I really like the commentating part, I was thinking like you could pick the commentating team that you would like to listen to.
Oh, yeah.
And then that's part of it, too, part of the draft. But we're open to suggestions there.
Yeah, I like that one. Maybe you couldn't. I don't know. I feel like if we include the classics, then we're all just going to pick Madden and Summerall. So you probably don't want to do that. But if you just include modern day of hey, these are the guys I want announcing my game. So I could say it would be Joe Davis and Tom Brady, or that if you're going the guys that are paired together, or can I cheat and pair them Joe Davis and Greg Olson, just for example.
Oh, you want to do a fantasy one where you take Burkhardt out of the Brady pair, that's interesting. Well,
so I could pick my play-by-play guy, and I can pick my color commentator.
We could do that. We could do that as 2 separate rounds, because then that's just 2 rounds. I don't mind that as an idea, because I know I'm going to have an off the board pick for that. I'm going to have a random pick that everybody's going to go, this is what you picked, because I really delve into that side of things. So I'm going to have a very random pick by everybody's opinion, I think, for both of the play-by-play and the analyst. But that I think is a good tweak, that you do a play-by-play guy and an analyst, and then you have to pick those separate rounds. So then that would be 6 rounds total, and I like that it's competing strategies. It's, do you pick the football side? Do you pick the meal side? What do you think of all that, Shayne? Do you think that you've been listening here? What do you think of those ideas?
Well, I think if we're taking things off the board, which means they are unavailable to someone else, and you're going through the rounds, I think if the priority is a certain thing, then I don't think you have everybody pick the main course first, because obviously we're going to run out of main courses and people are going to have to, say turducken or something instead. So I think if you really want Pat Summerall, then you pick him first.
That's what I'm viewing this as, wide open. There's no by round. It's you can pick anything out of those categories.
Turkey's on the board, okay, take turkey.
Yep.
If whoever's on the board, whatever your priority is, I get that. And that's kind of the funny thing about listening to I've overheard fantasy football drafts. I've been in the room when I've been picked in the first round of a fantasy draft, and everyone made fun of the guy. He won a $20,000 pool because it was a major league team, and he was one of my friends, and he picked me in the first round. Might have been drunk before it started, but listening to that, and when guys are taken off the board, other guys can't have them. It's kind of cool, and then you see like his priority was his friend more so than it was, I'm going to get the star quarterback or receiver or whatever people get the most point value out of and take their first picks for. So I think that would be cool.
Yeah, I like that you have to have the strategy for it, because that'd be very similar to a fantasy football draft. That's a good comparison, that you've got the different positions, and you've got different people are going to value those differently. Same with the Thanksgiving picks. So okay, good. I think we got a good structure here. We'll figure out how to actually do the draft, because we'll have the interviews in different slots, but we might do it. I might circulate it in advance, but we'll make sure to have the picks done by the end of the night there. But that'll be fun. But Jacob, on the way out, what do you think for the score here for the game, and how do you see this game playing out?
Yeah, so this is we've been talking about it a bunch in Green Bay circles this week. This is the biggest stretch of the season for the Packers. 5 of their next 7 are against the division. So they've got 2 against Chicago, they got 1 against Detroit, 1 against Minnesota. And then they finished the season actually against Minnesota. And, oh, by the way, the other 2 games are in Denver and at home against Baltimore. So no more cupcakes left on the schedule. Football, for all intents and purposes, starts on Sunday. You're asking in some of these games, you're almost asking, like, which quarterback do you trust more if things around them are going to go awry? And I think with the way Jordan Love has played this year, I know the box score numbers do not look great from Sunday's game. If you're going just off the box score, that's fine, I get it. Not everybody has time to watch all 32 teams play, but that was one of the best games that Love has played in a long time. It's 7 drops of his 11 incompletions. I think when everything's around him, he's just kind of cool and collected with everything like that. He is certainly capable of kind of putting up a dud, as we've seen in recent memory as well. But this is a game where it's a Thursday game. It's a short week. That induces some semblance of chaos. I think Jordan Love is just playing really, really well here in the last couple of weeks, especially this past Sunday against the Giants. So I'm taking the better quarterback. I think the better quarterback this season has been Jordan Love, but I would not be surprised at all. Detroit is a different team on that turf at Ford Field than they are anywhere else. But these are 2 teams that I will not be surprised if they end up playing a third time. So I'll go Green Bay 27-24.
I literally thought that's what your prediction was going to be. I must talk to you too much, Jacob. That's like that. I predicted your prediction. So that's no. I do think it could play out that way. And like you said, I hope it's a third time, so then we can talk to you and do this again. But I'm glad we got the Thanksgiving draft, kind of the machinations kind of worked out. But we'll look forward to talking with you on Thanksgiving. We appreciate you doing that with us. And be sure to tell people where they can follow your coverage here leading up to the game and also for the game upcoming on Sunday.
Yeah, Packers on SI, so si.com/NFL/Packers. I write anywhere between 3 to 6 stories a week. It just kind of depends on what all's going on. I'm looking forward to Sunday's game. It's a game against Minnesota that it's a big one. It's a division game. The Packers have talked a lot about it. They keep saying they're going to play better. I've got some really cool story ideas. I just need some certain things to play out in that regard. And then the other thing that I do that is probably of interest to your guys' group, every week I have the matchup of whoever Green Bay's playing against. So Green Bay's passing offense against Detroit's pass defense, for example, and then like what's that look like by the numbers, who has the advantage based on some other stuff, injuries and stuff obviously play a factor in some of that analysis as well. So that's something you can find. It's usually Tuesday or Wednesday. With it being a short week next week, it might come out a smidge sooner than that. But short week, it's football. That's the business we chose to go into. So that's the way that it works.
Well, that's how this all happened with Thanksgiving, because it was like, I'm the only one crazy enough to work on Thanksgiving, right? And then I put it out to you, and I put it out to Ryan, I put it out to Shayne, and everybody was in. Dan was in. So now we'll have some fun, and it'll be fun to cover the game on the day of too. But
Did you have to tell your family to change their my family's meal time is scheduled around the fact that the Packers play at noon?
Oh yeah, we're going to lunch, quote unquote, at 10:30. in the morning.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, so we'll have it out of the way and then be able to go back for the line. So I had that 7 to 9 window open, so it was like, hey, this could be fun. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to the draft. I'm looking forward to talking with you about hopefully a good game. Hopefully we do get a 27-24 game. Obviously the Packers are hoping their way, Lions are hoping their way, but hopefully it's a close one and a good one to talk about. But either way, we'll look forward to talking with you, and be sure to check out Jacob's coverage because I do like those preview articles that he writes, and we'll look forward to talking to you on Thanksgiving here.
Appreciate you guys. Shayne, since somebody picked you first overall, I'll go ahead and add you to my fantasy team. I don't think you'll get me any points this week, but I'll give it a shot.
If I'm on someone's fantasy team this week, we got other problems to worry about.
I mean, he looks pretty good. He looks like he could still do it. So, I mean, I don't blame you for that pick, Jacob.
I'll do what I can. I think now that I look, my league doesn't even have a kicker on it. That shows you how much I pay attention to who's on my team.
Oh boy,
that's not a Shayne approved league then. If there's no kicker.
Sorry.
I actually did a cameo earlier this year because I do a lot of people's fantasy draft order picks on Cameo. And
sure.
I did one, and at the end of it, I had to give a spiel making fun of the guy because I guess the winner each year got to make a new rule for the next year. So his rule was no kicking. So I had to basically dog him out the whole video about how he's ruining it for everybody and making it horrible. So a league without kickers in fantasy is just a daydream.
I tell you, one rule that they should be looking into is these guys who, kind of like in the regular NFL, if you got a kicker who can make it from 60 and beyond, you have a competitive advantage. I think you should have more points for a kick that's those 60-yarders because I feel like those are becoming more and more prevalent. They should be worth something.
I think some leagues actually have a little bit of a weighted scale like that.
I wouldn't be surprised if the NFL ends up changing up that way as well at some point. Or if that rule gets proposed. Once we get the tush push and all that stuff banned that everybody's doing the next couple of years, we'll do field goals for 60-plus or worth 4 points or something like that.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Well, we were talking about Antoine Walker earlier. He was the guy that said, "Why do you shoot so many threes?" And he said, "Because there are no fours." So maybe that'll be the case here with the kickers here. We'll add a 4-pointer.
There you go. That's perfect. I didn't know he said that, so thanks for teaching me that one. I appreciate it.
Well, I had that in my mind since you mentioned it, so it came full circle there for us with the 4-pointer. So yeah, see, this is going to be fun to do the draft on Thursday, but we appreciate you joining the show, and we'll look forward to talking to you next week.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thanks, Jacob. Talk to you soon. Thanks to Jacob Westendorf. We'll be talking to him next week, and we'll come back and finish up the show here with Shayne and talk about the draft and maybe get Dan's opinion on the draft because he's been sitting in listening. He's got multiple headphones, and I don't know what he's listening to, if he's listening to me or listening to something else, but we'll get his opinion on the draft because he'll be here for that too. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Glad you could join us for the show here. We had great stuff from Jacob Westendorf, Glenn Erby, and Ty Schalter. We appreciate them joining the show. Also appreciate the support of the sponsors, Encore Business Group, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Williams Chiropractic, Elite Winning Solutions, and Sal's Complete Home Painting and Handyman Services. Appreciate their support here. And be sure to tune in. We'll have the podcast coming up after the show. The podcast and the YouTube will be posted on the social media. So if you missed anything or if you want to rehear anything, it'll be on there. We've got a lot of stuff coming up on the Jethro lineup, including us next week. We've got the Sports Project in between 10 to 12 on Saturday, and then Sports Intel 7 to 9 on Monday. But I'm excited to do this show on Thanksgiving. I think this is going to be fun, Shayne. And so are we settled? Do we like this? And I also want to get Dan's opinion. Do we like the main course, 2 sides, a dessert, and a play-by-play person and a commentator and an analyst? That was kind of what Jacob was suggesting. Do we like that as a combination? Do we want to make any tweaks? I open it up to both of you here.
I think as long as you have to have options, the options can't be unlimited. So someone can't just pull out of thin air, I want I don't even know what I'm thinking. I want duck.
Okay.
Like you've got to have turkey, ham, Someone tell me.
Well, I mean, can we do like prime rib? Does that work?
Okay, let's say prime rib,
Okay.
and then I think you got to have, if you pick late, hamburger, hot dog.
Oh, okay. So
you gotta tier it down so that the later the pick, the worse you get. So you don't have what can still be considered a prime choice.
So I can't do a workaround like you already took those and prime rib was taken, and I can't say like New York strip.
Exactly.
I can't take something that's obviously good.
Because if that's the case, then I'll have a ribeye,
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
We need to make it like you end up with hot dog.
Okay, I like this. What do you think of this, Dan? You're going to be participating in
That's
this too.
fair, because I was going to say, like, if you take ham or turkey, I'll just do prime rib or a steak. So I guess if one of us, are we stuck in the same pick every round? Are we snaking this?
I think it's snake. I think the snake is most fair, because if you start out with one and you're able to pull turkey or whatever you want to pick at number one, then you got to pick 10th, and then the guy that picks 5th has got to pick 6th. You got to have
and
the
then
snake.
each round has a category. Like first, it's main course.
No, free category.
Free category,
you can
but
take
you have
anything
to-
you want, but we're going to do a draft board. I think is Shayne's rule, and I think that'll be good that we do a draft board, and you can only pick from the 10 sides. 5. Maybe we let people go off with the play-by-play and because otherwise
that one can be the one where, okay, my guy's gone. All right, and then someone could pull out, Vince Scully or like I'm just example.
Right.
You just give those options, but I think with the food, you've got to create like some options, even if there's extra options, right? Like on the side dishes, but then maybe you get down to not pinto beans, but like Vanna sausage or something,
Yes.
or like beanie weenies, like some sort of a canned something that nobody really wants.
Yeah.
But I feel like you have to have a little bit of a reward type risk reward system.
I like this. You have to have the quality. It has to vary.
Yeah.
You can't just get all. Okay, so we'll put the draft board together this week. But I like this. Be sure to tune in to us next week from 7 to 9. We're going to be on live. We're going to be talking about the game, and we're going to be doing the draft and talking about the Thanksgiving draft. So until then, thanks for kicking it with Shayne and I. And you've been listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points with Ryan Walsh, and we'll talk to you next week.